All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we have a couple members, but I know at least one of them's in the building. I just saw her. So we'll get going, and then they can join us later. BPS, are we all good to go?
Chair Brooks, this is BPS. You are live to the broadcast and may start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I would like to call this meeting the Joint Subcommittee on General Government to order. Secretary, you please call the roll.
Assemblywoman Gorlow. Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Hudagi. Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters. Assemblywoman Miller. Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Chair Brooks.
Here. All right, thank you. I just want to remind everyone this morning that we can, if you wanted to make public comment, we're going to have public comment at the end of the agenda, and all the information necessary to join in and make public comment is on the agenda this morning. I'm good, thanks. And on the agenda on how to call in, or you can join in person. There are currently, we do have the ability, we have some staff in the committee room with us, and we do have the ability for the amount of people who can, a limit on the amount of people who can be in this meeting room. And if you want to attend in person, whether it is to make public comment or you are presenting in this committee, you can go to and register to attend by visiting the legislature's website, the Nellis portion of the website, and register, and then you can be in the room with us on scheduled meetings. And I would like to also remind the members just to, well, we're not using laptops anymore and muting our cameras, so I don't have to do that, sorry. Today we will be closing 16 budgets from the Department of Business and Industry, including the Director's Office, the Division of Insurance, the Division of Industrial Relations, the Division of Mortgage Lending, and the Nevada Transportation Authority. First up, we have Mr. Colby Nichols, and then we'll have Madison Ryan, who will be walking the subcommittee through these closing packets. Mr. Nichols, please walk us through the first 4 budgets when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Colby Nichols. I'm a program analyst with the LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. As you indicated, I'll be going over the subcommittee closings for the Department of Business and Industry's Director's Office. The first budget is the Business and Industry Administration budget. Discussion of this begins on page 3 of your closing packet. There is one major closing issue associated with this account. That is the continuation of the Consumer Affairs Unit. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of approximately $685,000 in fiscal year 22 and $701,000 in fiscal year 23 to reinstate the Consumer Affairs Unit, which consists of 6.6 full-time equivalent positions and the associated costs. I would note that pursuant to statute, the Consumer Affairs Unit is currently set to sunset at the end of this biennium. So this recommendation would be contingent upon passage and approval of enabling legislation that further extends or removes altogether the statutory sunset date. During the budget hearing, the agency had indicated that the Consumer Affairs Unit had experienced an increase in consumer inquiries in fiscal year 20, as well as an increased level of business to date in fiscal year 21. In response to subcommittee questions, the agency indicated it believed that the COVID-19 pandemic had contributed to this increase in inquiries, particularly for inquiries that were related to business practices and price inflation in response to the pandemic. The subcommittee had inquired whether there were also any other trends that were contributing to the increased workload of the Consumer Affairs Unit. And in response, the agency testified that the type and number of inquiries that are received by the unit has been reactive to trends in the economy. For example, inquiries related to telemarketing used to be the primary type of inquiry. However, as technology and the increasing popularity of web-based communication and shopping has contributed to an increase in the number of inquiries related to communications companies and internet fraud. There are also several other categories that had seen an increased level of interest during the pandemic. For example, inquiries related to home repairs and contracting. And the agency indicated they believed the increased amount of time people were spending at home was contributing to those factors. The agency did indicate that it did believe those trends would continue into the forthcoming 2021-23 biennium. The subcommittee also inquired what the impact would be to the department and to consumers if the Consumer Affairs Unit were not continued. In response, the agency indicated that the Office of the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Bureau would continue its operations. However, the scope of that office is typically focused on large-scale civil or criminal cases, as opposed to the work of the Consumer Affairs Unit, which can include investigation and resolution of cases for customers who may not have the resources or time to pursue a larger case that involves a court. In addition, the Consumer Affairs Unit also offers education to vulnerable populations such as seniors in an effort to reduce the number and severity of fraud cases. And the agency indicated it was not aware of any similar programs that would be provided by the state should the Consumer Affairs Unit disband at the end of the biennium. The agency expressed concern that should the Consumer Affairs Unit not continue to the 2021-23 biennium, the agency's customer base would be negatively impacted by reduced access to information, investigations, and complaint resolution. I would note that the agency has submitted bill draft request 1094. My understanding is the intent of that bill would be to permanently remove the sunset provision as opposed to extend it altogether. However, to my knowledge, that BDR has not yet been introduced as a bill for consideration by the legislature. So the decision for the subcommittee's consideration is whether they wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations, $685,432 in fiscal year 22, $701,038 in fiscal year 23 for the support of 6.6 full-time equivalent positions and the associated costs to continue the Consumer Affairs Unit, contingent upon the passage and approval of Bill Draft Request 1094 or any other enabling legislation that would extend or remove the prospective sunset date for the unit.
Thank you. Do any of the committee members have any questions on that? Mr. Hafen. Assemblyman Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just a little confused, and you can probably clear it up. So the enabling legislation that would make this possible has not been put forth, and I just wonder why that is. If this is something that we really want to do, you would think that the BDR would have been put forth. Or are we just looking at if the enabling legislation does not come through whatever path, is this just general fund appropriations that do they have to fund this?
Thank you for the question. The Consumer Affairs Unit is fully funded by general fund appropriations. The bill draft request that I referenced, 1094, is a budget implementation bill. To my knowledge, the majority of those bills have not been introduced yet. At this point, I'm unaware of the timeline when those bills would be introduced, but I would note that the budget implementation bills are exempt by nature, meaning for example, last session, I believe the budget implementation bills were also being introduced at a later date. And the last thing I would note is that the decision before the subcommittee today related to this enhancement, it's been established that it would be contingent on the passage of the legislation. So should no legislation advance, the motion that the subcommittee would take today would establish that contingency. So if the legislation did not pass, this decision unit would not be included in the budget and the appropriations would not be made.
Thank you. You just answered my second question. So to be clear, if the legislation doesn't come through, it doesn't activate the use of the funding towards this purpose. Is that how we're seeing it?
The motion before the subcommittee today should establish that contingency, so that would be the case, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman Levitt. Apologize, I was reading Assemblyman Hafen's nameplate right when I called on you. Any other questions from any of the committee members? All right, I would entertain a motion on this decision.
Thank you, Chair. I would recommend that the subcommittee approves general fund appropriations of $685,432 in FY 2022 and $701,038 in FY 2023 for the support of 6.6 full-time equivalent positions and associated costs to continue the Consumer Affairs Unit contingent upon the passage and approval of Bill Draft Request 1094 and any other enabling legislation extending or removing the prospective sunset date for the unit.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Chair Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none. All in favor, aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously, and we can move on to the other items.
Great, thank you again. My name is Colby Nichols, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. There are 5 other closing items associated with this account. They are included on a table on page 5 of your closing packet. I would just note that other closing items 4 and 5, these are companion decision units. There's a transfer of an IT professional position from the Taxi Cab Authority budget to this budget. So fiscal staff would recommend that other closing items 1, 2, and 3 be closed as recommended by the governor, and that other closing items 4 and 5 be closed consistent with the subcommittee's decision regarding the companion decision unit, the Taxi Cab Authority budget, which is currently scheduled to be considered by the subcommittee on April 30th. And finally, fiscal staff would request authority to make technical adjustments to this budget as needed.
Thank you. Any questions on the other closing items? Seeing none, I'll take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I would move to close other closing items as recommended, as described by staff.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Chair Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously, and we can move on to the next budgets.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Colby Nichols, LCB Fiscal Analysis. With your permission, what I'll do for the next 3 budgets, which are staff closed, recommended for closure by staff, I will go through each budget account, pause briefly for questions if available, and then at the end, to save time, perhaps we could do the staff closures as a single motion. So the first budget for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Office of Business and Planning. Discussion of this budget begins on page 7 of your closing packet. And the Office of Business, Finance, and Planning administers various programs to assist and support the growth and development of business and industry in the state, including the encouraging the creation and expansion of small businesses through advocacy and providing access to services, referral services within the department, and operations of the Center for Business Advocacy and Services. The Office of Business, Finance, and Planning budget is funded entirely through general fund appropriations. There are no major closing issues associated with this account. There are 2 other closing items included on the table on page 8 for cost allocations. And as I referenced, closing recommendations for this budget would be included in the summary page. So I'll pause briefly here for questions if there are any.
Any questions, committee? All right, we can move to the next budget.
Right. The second staff closure budget is the New Markets Performance Guarantee account, which begins on page 9 of your closing packet. The New Markets Performance Guarantee budget is established to provide oversight on economic development related to the new Nevada Markets Job Act as codified in Nevada Revised Statutes Chapter 231A. The purpose of that act is to encourage investments into businesses or nonprofit organizations in low-income areas to encourage economic and community growth. There are no major closing issues associated with this account. There is only one other closing item listed on page 10. And again, closing recommendations would be included in the summary. So I'll pause here for questions if there are any.
Any questions on this budget, committee? Senator Goicoechea.
Yes, thank you. You know, we've got
significant revenues or reserves in there. Do we anticipate we're going to expend this? It really doesn't look like there's much of a program going forward.
Thank you for the question, Senator Goicoechea. The vast majority of what you're seeing in the balance forward amounts is the performance guarantee. So as entities, qualified development entities, part of their requirements for this program is to hold a certain amount of the investment in this account. And then over the performance period of the investment, the director is essentially evaluating to make sure they're compliant. And so the money in this account, the vast majority of it is not a standard operating reserve. It's essentially akin to a performance bond. So there's a certain amount of money, I believe it's around $250,000 per investment, that is held here over the performance period of the bond. And then if the entity meets the requirements of the New Markets Job Act, they will receive it. Otherwise, the money would be reverted to the general fund. So when you look at what's just the operating reserve in this account, it's much lower. It's around 90,000, I believe, and that is based on a non-refundable application fee. So again, I understand that the balance forward amounts appear high, but that's not a standard operating reserve. I hope that addresses some of your question.
Yes, thank you, Kobe. And I guess then what you're saying, ultimately, this all does revert or get put into new programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Goicoechea. Any other questions from the committee? All right, Mr. Nichols, you can move on to the next budget.
The third staff closure budget for the B&I Director's Office is the Private Activity Bonds budget. This begins on page 11 of your packet. The Department of Business and Industry Director's Office administers the state share of bonding authority, which is also known as the volume cap for the issuance of tax-exempt private activity bonds. In addition, the Director's Office administers the Charter School Bond Program. Several examples of the bond programs included in this budget are included in the bulleted list on page 12. The budget is funded primarily through the various application, transfer, and processing fees that are associated with these bonding programs. There are no major closing issues or other closing items associated with this account.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Any questions on this budget from the committee? I see none, so I think we can move on to the summary.
All right. So as again, Colby Nichols, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. As I previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations for the following budgets. And to assist with the closing, we've identified budgets that are recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor. So fiscal staff would recommend that the budget account 4677, Office of Business and Planning, 4678, New Markets Performance Guarantee, and 4683 be closed as recommended by the governor and request authority for staff to make technical adjustments to those budgets as needed.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions on that summary and closing recommendation? All right, so seeing none, I would take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I would move that the committee recommend budget closure as described by staff on the summary page of this document.
Second.
I have a motion from Chair Peters and a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Opposed? All right, the motion carries, and we can move on to our next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. There are 12 budget accounts I will be presenting under the Department of Business and Industry for the subcommittee's consideration this morning to be closed. The first budget can be found on page 15 of your closing packet, and it is the insurance regulation budget, which was heard by the subcommittee on February 25th, 2021. The insurance regulation budget account is the main budget for the Division of Insurance and is responsible for regulating the insurance industry by licensing insurance companies, producers, brokers, and other professionals and sets ethical and financial standards for insurance companies. This budget account is primarily funded through a combination of interagency transfers, assessments, and fees. There are no major closing issues in this budget account. There are 3 other closing items that are identified in the table on the top of page 16 of the closing document. Other closing item 1 is for replacement equipment, and other closing items 2 and 3 are for cost allocation adjustments. Fiscal staff recommends all other closing items be closed as recommended by the governor, with this authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Does the committee have any questions on that budget? I don't see any, so we can take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I would move the committee recommend budget closure as described by staff.
Second.
I have a motion from Chair Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? And the motion passes unanimously with those present. And please note that Assemblyman Hafen has arrived, and mark him present, please. And we can move on to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. The second budget account for the subcommittee's consideration is the Division of Industrial Relations, which was heard by the subcommittee on February 25th, 2021, and can be located on page 17 of the closing packet. The Division of Industrial Relations is primarily funded through an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund and is responsible for regulating workers' compensation insurance to ensure injured workers receive the benefits to which they are entitled. The division administrator and support staff positions are funded in the Division of Industrial Relations budget account, and the division administrator is responsible for the administration of the duties and functions related to the Division of Industrial Relations, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, Safety Training and Consultation, Mechanical Compliance, and the Mine Safety and Training sections. There is one major closing issue in this budget account, which is Decision Unit E225, which is a proposed statutory and funding source change related to the governor's recommendation to offset the elimination of fee revenue related to the oversight of employee leasing companies with an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund. The Division of Industrial Relations is currently responsible for licensing and certain regulatory duties of employee leasing companies, which was proposed to transfer to the Division of Insurance through Senate Bill 55, which has since been amended to replace the Division of Insurance with the Office of the Labor Commissioner. The Division of Industrial Relations currently collects a $500 application fee for employee leasing companies, which is utilized as a source of revenue in this budget, which the executive budget recommends to remove the projected revenue associated with employee leasing companies from this budget account and recommends an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund to offset that corresponding shortfall created by the proposed revenue removal. During the February 25th budget hearing, the Division of Industrial Relations testified that the primary reason the oversight of employee leasing companies is recommended to be transferred to another agency within the department is due to the review of financial statements that is required as part of the application process being better suited for a different agency to handle. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $114,115 in each year of the 2021-23 biennium to offset the elimination of fee revenue related to the oversight of employee leasing companies, which is recommended to transfer to a different agency within the Department of Business and Industry? And this recommendation is contingent upon the passage and approval of Senate Bill 55 or other enabling legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Does the committee have any questions on that? Assemblyman Levitt.
Just for clarification, so if Senate Bill 55 is not implemented or passed, so these duties would not, the revenue wouldn't go to the Division of Insurance. Would this continue to go to the Division of Industrial Relations, or does that just go away? So if it's not transferring to the Division of Insurance through legislation, does it just continue to go how it's been going? Is there other legislation that has to be implemented for the Division of Industrial Relations to continue to receive?
Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal. For the record, Mr. Chairman, through you to Assemblyman Levitt, that would be correct. So if Senate Bill 55 does not pass, this would remain under the Division of Industrial Relations, so they would still be responsible for the regulatory duties of employee leasing companies. And should that want to be changed to be transferred to a different division, other legislation would have to be passed in order to do so, if Senate Bill 55 does not get approved.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. So I guess my follow-up question is the Division of Industrial Relations harmed in any way as far as the way they receive their particular revenue source? If the division, if it's not, so my question is if it doesn't go to the Division of Insurance, does it still go to the Division of Industrial Relations, or is it an all or nothing?
So Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal, for the record. So if it is not passed, the division, it would still occur how it has been. So they would still perform the duties, receive the revenue, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Levitt. Any other questions from the committee? All right, well, I would take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I would move to recommend approval of an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $114,115 in each year of the 2021-23 biennium to offset the elimination of fee revenue related to the oversight of employee leasing companies, which is recommended to transfer to a different agency within the Department of Business and Industry. This recommendation would be contingent upon the passage and approval of Senate Bill 55 or other enabling legislation.
Second.
I have a motion from Chair Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? And the motion passes unanimously, and we can move on to the other closing items, please. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan, Fiscal Analysis Division. For the record, there are 4 other closing items in this budget account, which are identified on page 19 of the closing packet. Other closing items 1 and 2 are for replacement equipment, and other closing items 3 and 4 are for cost allocation adjustments. Fiscal staff recommends all other closing items be approved as recommended by the governor, with authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, I'll take a motion on that.
Thank you, Chair. I would move to recommend all other closing items be approved as recommended by the governor with authority to make with staff authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Second.
I have a motion from Chair Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes unanimously, and we can move on to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan. For the record, the third budget account for the subcommittee's consideration is the Division of Mortgage Lending, which is on page 21 of the closing packet. The Mortgage Lending Division licenses and regulates the mortgage lending industry and safeguards public interest in the mortgage lending and escrow industries. This budget is funded through various fees, and there is one major closing issue related to the increasing reserve levels in the Mortgage Lending Division budget. The executive budget includes an anticipated ending reserve balance of $13.9 million at the end of fiscal year 2023. According to the agency, an optimal reserve level would be 120 days of operating expenditures, which equates to approximately $1.1 million in each year of the 2021-23 biennium, based on expenditures of approximately $3.2 million in fiscal year 2022 and $3.3 million in fiscal year 2023. The 2019 legislature expressed concern over the Mortgage Lending Division's increasing reserve levels, which the agency attempted to address by reducing fees during the interim, such as the new and renewal fees for mortgage loan originator licenses, which the agency indicates these fees were considered in the restructure as they are the largest licensing revenues for the agency. The agency testified that it had anticipated being able to report back to the legislator during the 2021 session on how the fee restructure performed during the interim had reduced reserve levels. However, due to factors such as the pandemic and the growth of the industry, these reserve levels are still projected to increase over the 2021-23 biennium. The executive budget represents projected reserves equivalent to approximately 1,495 days, or 4.1 years worth of total recommended expenditures in fiscal year 2022, and 1,531 days, or 4.2 years worth of total recommended expenditures in fiscal year 2023. Considering the high level of reserves included in the Division of Mortgage Lending's budget for the upcoming biennium, the subcommittee may wish to recommend issuing a letter of intent directing the agency to review its fee structure and provide the interim finance committee with a report prior to the commencement of the 2023 legislative session on how the agency intends to reduce its reserve to a reasonable level.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Do we have any questions from the committee on this budget right here? All right. I don't see any questions, so we can take a motion. Oh, Senator Goicoechea.
Thank you, and I just slow on the uptake this morning, Mr. Chair. But I'm just, again, we're looking at reducing this reserve, and because it's such a mirage of different fees that are collected, that there has to be somewhere that's, we can reduce those back. I mean, when we start looking at operating, when we got 4 years of operating reserves, that's a little much. So I guess I am concerned about that. I'd hope we could deal with it now without waiting till the 2023 session. Being as money is short. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator Goicoechea. I share that concern, and it's my understanding that these are all fees that are set by the agency itself, and some of them have statutory caps, but they're set by the agency. And yeah, it seems like this boom and refinancing and real estate transactions in the state has kind of led to the swelling of this reserve. But yes, I agree with you.
It's not really just a comment. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions, comments, or discussion on this budget? All right, so I think we can take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that the committee recommend issuing issuing a letter of intent directing the agency to provide the interim finance committee with a report prior to the commencement of the 2023 legislative session on how the agency intends to reduce its reserves to a reasonable level.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion from Chair Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? And seeing none, all in favor, aye. Opposed? All right, and that motion passes unanimously, and we can move on to the next budget. After we look at other closing items in that budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal for the record. There are 4 other closing items identified on page 23 of the closing packet. The first other closing item is for additional authority for out-of-state travel expenses. Other closing item 2 is for replacement equipment, and other closing items 3 and 4 are for cost allocation adjustments. Fiscal staff recommends all other closing items be closed as recommended by the governor, with authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Any questions on those closing items? Seeing none, I'll take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to that the committee recommend budget closures as described by staff for other closing items.
Second.
Motion from Chair Peters, second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? All right, I see none, so all in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes unanimously. And now we can move to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will now begin presenting the budgets which the subcommittee has not previously reviewed for the Department of Business and Industry, and for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations. I will pause following my presentation of each budget to allow for questions. and when I have presented the last budget in this group and questions have been addressed, the chair may wish to ask for a single motion for closing consideration on all of the budgets for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations. So the first budget, which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for, is the Nevada Attorney for Injured Workers budget account, which can be found on page 25 of the closing packet. The Nevada Attorney for Injured Workers represents injured workers without charge to the worker. This budget account is funded entirely through allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund, and there are no major closing issues in this budget. There are 4 other closing items identified at the top of page 26 of the closing packet. Other closing item 1 is for replacement equipment, and other closing items 2 and 3 are for cost allocation adjustments. Other closing item 4 is a base budget technical adjustment to adjust expenditure authority for the agency's IT systems contract, which is currently $17,500 over the biennium, but should reflect $17,500 in each fiscal year of the biennium. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet, and I would be happy to answer any questions members may have regarding this budget account at this time.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, I see none, so we can go to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan. For the record, the next budget for which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Captive Insurers budget account, which is under the Division of Insurance and regulates and supervises captive insurers in the state of Nevada. Captive insurance is a regulated form of self-insurance in which the insurer is owned wholly by the insureds. This budget is self-funded through various fees and captive insurance premium assessments. There are no major closing issues. There are 3 other closing items identified in the middle of page 28 of the closing packet. And the first 2 closing items are for cost allocation adjustments. And the third closing item is for replacement equipment, where staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove 2 recommended desktop replacements that were already purchased in fiscal year 2021 and are no longer needed by the agency. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet, and I would be happy to answer any questions members may have regarding this budget account at this time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we can move to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan. For the record, the next budget for which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for is the Insurance Recovery Budget account, which can be found on page 29 of the closing packet. The Insurance Recovery Budget account is also under the Division of Insurance and was created to provide a means of satisfying claims against persons licensed under certain statutes. Payment to a claimant on behalf of a licensee is only paid if the licensee has no other assets to pay the claim. There are no major closing issues and only 1 other closing item, which staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove the statewide cost allocation from this budget account, as funding is restricted and would be inconsistent to be used for this expenditure. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet, and I would be happy to answer any questions members may have regarding this budget account.
Any questions, committee? All right, we can move to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan. For the record, the next budget for which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Self-Insured Workers' Compensation budget, which can be found on page 31 of the closing packet. The Self-Insured Workers' Compensation budget is also under the Division of Insurance and supports activities to regulate employers who elect to self-insure their workers' compensation risks. This budget is funded through application fees, examination fees, fines, and an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund. There are no major closing issues, and there are 3 other closing items as shown on the middle of page 32 of the closing packet. The first 2 other closing items are cost allocation adjustments as recommended by the governor, and other closing item 3 is for replacement equipment, which staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove 1 recommended desktop replacement that was already purchased in fiscal year 2021 and is no longer needed by the agency. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? I see none, so we can move to the next budget, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan. For the record, the next budget for which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Nevada Transportation Authority budget account, which can be found on page 33 of the closing packet. The Nevada Transportation Authority regulates the transportation industry, which includes tow cars, the bus industry, taxi cabs, excluding those in Clark County, the limousine industry, and transportation network companies. The Nevada Transportation Authority budget is funded through highway fund appropriations, fees collected from licensees, and regulatory assessments collected from transportation network companies. There are no major closing issues in this budget account. There are 4 other closing items, which can be located at the top of page 34 of the closing packet. Other closing item 1 is a subscription for video and audio conferencing software, and other closing items 2 and 3 are for cost allocation adjustments. Other closing item 4 is for replacement equipment, which staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove replacement equipment items that were already purchased in fiscal year 2021 and are no longer needed by the agency. Closing recommendations, again, are included on the summary page in the closing packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does the committee have any questions? I do not see any, so we can go on to the next one.
The next budget for which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Transportation Authority Admin Fines budget, which can be found on page 35 of the closing packet. The Transportation Authority Admin Fines account is under the Nevada Transportation Authority and requires that collected fines be credited to a separate account and utilized by the Nevada Transportation Authority only to enforce the provisions of the chapter. There are no major closing issues or other closing items in this budget account, and closing recommendations are included on the summary page in the closing packet. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? I see none, so we can move on to the next budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan for the record. The next budget, which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for, is the Occupational Safety and Health Enforcement budget account, which can be located on page 37 of the closing packet. The Occupational Safety and Health Enforcement section is under the Division of Industrial Relations and assures safe and healthy working conditions by conducting inspections and investigations. The Mechanical Compliance section within the Occupational Safety and Health Enforcement section provides oversight and conducts inspections of all elevators, escalators, boilers, pressure vessels, and related objects. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration budget is funded through an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund, nominal fee revenues, and federal grants. There are no major closing issues and 5 other closing items in this budget. And other closing item 1 is for software subscriptions. Other closing items 2 and 3 are for replacement equipment, and other closing items 4 and 5 are for cost allocation adjustments. Closing recommendations are included on the summary page, and I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding this budget account.
I have a question from Senator Goicoechea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And clearly, we know that OSHA has been very actively engaged during this pandemic with a lot of inspections across the state. And I'm looking at, we've got almost a 16.5% increase in revenues. Is that somewhat derived from the fact that, say, some CARES Act money? Is that what's being infused here? Clearly, I think as OSHA has been traveling around the state, we must have infused some of those federal dollars. I know there is a slight increase, $250,000 or so in federal funds, but is it CARES Act money or COVID money?
Madison Ryan, LCB, for the record, for you, Mr. Chairman, to Senator Goicoechea. So this budget account funded with Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund, so there'd be the CARES Act dollars in fiscal year 2020, 2021 for, certain funding sources like telework or covering expenses or salaries that were related to enforcing COVID-19. But in fiscal year 2022 and 2023, the only funding is federal compensation and non.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And did you need Ms. Ryan to repeat that last piece? Because I know she broke up a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't quite get it, but that's why I said, okay, it's just my hard hearing.
No. Ms. Ryan, if you could repeat that last piece of your explanation there, that would be great. We broke up a little bit.
Of course. So for fiscal year 2020, there is some CARES Act funding that was used to address telework and address certain salary or payments to employees for COVID-19 work. But in fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023, there is no CARES Act funding included in this budget request. It would just be the allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund, the nominal fee revenues, as well as the federal grants.
Yeah, I thank you, and Mr. Chair, if I may, and of course, we see that corresponding change. All of a sudden, then we're down to a 2.25% reduction versus the 16.6 that we had increase over the last, I'm just looking at the percentage changes, and most of that is attributed to federal from, say, from the 19 to 20, 20 to 21, we see a 16% increase in revenue. But then in 21, 22, and going forward, we do see that come back down. So thank you. And I'm assuming you're saying that is because there won't be CARES Act money coming in.
Madison Ryan, for the record, yes, that would be correct.
Thank you, Senator Gonchia, and thank you, Ms. Ryan, for explaining that to us. And we can move on to the next budget.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan, for the record. The next budget for which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for is the Safety Consultation and Training section, which can be found on page 39 of the closing packet. And the Safety Consultation and Training section assists employers in developing and implementing effective safety and health programs to reduce and prevent workplace hazards. And this budget is funded through an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund, as well as federal grant funds. There are no major closing issues. There are 5 other closing items in this budget, and other closing item 1 is for a software subscription. Other closing item 2 is for equipment repair. Other closing item 3 is for replacement equipment, and other closing items 3, 4, and 5 are for cost allocation adjustments. And closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Do we have any questions from the committee on that one? All right, we can move on to our last budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan, for the record. The next budget, which staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for, is the Mine Safety and Training section, which can be found on page 41 of the closing packet. The Mine Safety and Training section provides for mine inspection, technical assistance, consultation, safety, and health training to prevent mine accidents and occupational illness. The Mine Safety and Training section is funded through an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund and a federal grant for the administration of the Federal Mine Safety and Health Training Program. There are no major closing issues, and there are 5 other closing items in this budget account. And other closing items 1, 2, and 3 are for replacement equipment, and other closing items 4 and 5 are for cost allocation adjustments. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions prior to moving on to the closing summary document.
Does the committee have any questions on the Mine Safety and Training budget? I see none, so I think we can move to the summary of the closings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madison Ryan, for the record. The staff closing recommendations for the Department of Business and Industry can be found on page 43 of the closing packet. And as previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations for the following budgets. And to assist with the closing, fiscal staff has identified the budgets that are recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor, along with identified technical adjustments below. So fiscal staff recommends that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor with the technical adjustments noted, and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. So budget account 1013, Nevada Attorney for Injured Workers, including a technical adjustment to the base budget to increase expenditure authority for the JFG systems contract by $8,750 in each fiscal year of the 2021-23 biennium. Budget account 3818, captive insurers, including a technical adjustment to decision unit E710 to increase reserves by $2,804 in fiscal year 2023 to remove the 2 recommended desktop computer replacements. Budget account 3821, insurance recovery, including a technical adjustment to decision unit M100 to remove statewide cost allocation expenditures of $13,616 in fiscal year 2022 and $23,437 in fiscal year 2023. And budget account 4684, self-insured workers' compensation, including a technical adjustment to decision unit E710 to reduce the allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund by $1,402 in fiscal year 2023 to remove the recommended desktop computer replacement, and budget account 3922, Nevada Transportation Authority, including a technical adjustment to decision unit E710 to reduce highway fund appropriations by $2,804 in fiscal year 2022 and $12,278 in fiscal year 2023 to remove the recommended 6 laptop replacements and 4 desktop computer replacements, budget account 3923, Transportation Authority admin fines, budget account 4682, Occupational Safety and Health Enforcement, budget account 4685, Safety Consultation and Training, and budget account 4686, Mine Safety and Training.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Does the committee have any questions on the summary of the staff described closings? I see none, so I would take a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I would move to close these budgets as described by staff, as recommended by the governor, with technical adjustments as noted by staff, and additionally recommend that we grant authority to staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Second.
I have a motion from Chair Peters and a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? All right, I see none. So all in favor? Aye? Opposed? And the motion passes unanimously. And that is our last item on the agenda for the business today. And so I really would like to thank Ms. Ryan for walking through all those budgets so efficiently, and Mr. Nichols as well. I appreciate your help this morning and helping us get through these budgets. So that brings me to the last agenda item on our meeting today, and that's public comment. I do not see any public in the room here with us, and I don't believe anyone registered to show up and make comment today. So broadcast services, could you see if we have anyone on the telephone line that wants to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair Brooks. If you have joined the call and would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 208. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Maria Lisette Elizondo.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I have a couple of questions for the legislators here in the state of Carson City. I have a big problem with the law enforcement. My son was arrested last year, and when he was arrested, the police officers injured themselves on their own, and now they're making me pay their medical bill. And I am a single mom. My son is in probation now, and he's doing better to better himself and learn from his mistakes. And I mean, I'm a low-income mom. I do fear the cops here because the way they took action with my son's arrest was they used excessive force. And now I feel like I'm always being harassed by this law enforcement called stepping, the people that arrested my children, and now they're wanting me to pay their medical bills. And we have videos and witnesses where these cops were punching on my son when he wasn't resisting arrest, and he was in the ground, pinned down by 5 grown men on top of him. my son is only 110 pounds. So now these cops jumped on top of each other, they hurted each other, and now they're making me pay their medical expenses. And me, I'm a single mom. I can't work now because I have to be supervising my child. And so now I feel like these cops are like already going overboard with having me pay these medical bills for them. And I had bad experience with the cops here in the past. And I just feel like I'm going to be a victim, just like anybody else, or my son being a victim, like these kids getting killed by these law enforcement. So I am scared, and I do fear for my son's life. Because my child is just a teenager that did a mistake, and like just a normal teenager. Everybody does mistakes, and everybody could change their life. And I don't want my son to be targeted because they try to say he was a gang member and stuff. He's no gang member. He's just a teenage child committing mistakes. And I don't feel like my son is a gang member. And the way they filed my son here in the state of Nevada is as a gang member. And he's just a 15-year-old doing his mistakes just like anybody else has. And I feel like I'm a target here for these cops, and I feel like I get harassed a lot by these cops. And I also been touched by these cops in the past. And I want you guys to hear this, all that this is going on in your community. And I come from a big city where never once a cop ever harassed me the way they harass me here. So I would like you guys to hear out the community, because these cops do use to overpower their job on the things that they do. And they should distinguish what's a real gang member to a trouble team that is just doing mistakes. Because my son is not a gang member, and I feel like I don't have to pay these medical bills because these cops injure themselves on their own when they jumped on top of each other, trying to jump on top of a 110-pound child.
Thank you for your comments.
They
Can
could've
we
killed my
move on to
son.
the next caller, please?
Thank you, Chair. If you have recently joined the call and would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, and there are no additional public comment callers at this time.
Thank you. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. And I will see the rest of you on a very, very long day today.